Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon or evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to the latest in a series of webinars from the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority as part of National Science Week here in Australia. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and sea country where we're meeting. The people in this webinar are actually based in Townsville in Queensland in Australia, where the traditional owners are the Wulguru and Bindal peoples. But I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land and sea country throughout the Great Barrier Reef and acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. My name is David Wachenfeld. I'm the Chief Scientist at the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority. And today I'm going to be joined by two other staff members from the authority, Sascha Thyer, who works at the National Education Centre for the Great Barrier Reef, Reef HQ, and also Ben Palmer, who is our Assistant Director for International Business and the focal point for Australia's leadership in the International Coral Reef Initiative. Obviously, we're hoping that we've got people from all over the world joining us virtually today, and you can pop any questions that you might have into the chat function, and we'll weave those questions as I'm chatting with Sascha and Ben. We might also do a question and answer session at the end if we have time. We'll see how we go. So, having introduced Sascha and Ben, Sascha, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your role here at the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority?
Thanks, David. Well, I mainly look after construction and maintenance for the aquarium, so development projects and generally maintaining the life that we have here at Reef HQ. But primarily, I care for the coral reef exhibit, which is the largest living coral reef aquarium in the world. And it's a huge community of animals in a very large aquarium tank. So that's what I primarily do.
Fantastic, thanks Sascha. And Ben, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks David. Yes, so I'm, as David mentioned, I'm the Assistant Director of International Business at the Marine Park Authority, and I look after all of our international engagement activities. So as a recognised global leader in marine park management, the authority often has a lot of interest from other like agencies around the world who come to us seeking to either collaborate or to learn from us and to share their learnings with us. So I handle all of that engagement, and as well I do the agency's work as a member of the International Coral Reef Initiative, which is a large informal partnership of like-minded coral reef managers and others around the world. And at the moment, we are in partnership with the governments of Monaco and Indonesia as the secretary of the International Coral Reef Initiative until the middle of next year, and I'm leading all of that work for the authority as well.
Great, thanks Ben. So the theme of our discussion this morning is climate change, and so we've deliberately picked a couple of panelists to have a chat with to illustrate that climate change, obviously it's a global issue. It's the greatest threat to coral reefs around the world, including the Great Barrier Reef. And yet at the same time, the solutions to climate change lie in everything from immediate local actions in people's homes and businesses, right up to international collaborations. And of course, the biggest and most important international collaboration is the one to actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions and work together globally to stabilize our climate. But at the same time, there's a really important international collaboration around the people, the countries that have got coral reefs and how we can work together to protect those. So Ben, do you want to tell us a little bit more about the International Coral Reef Initiative?
Yes, thanks David. So the International Coral Reef Initiative, as I mentioned, is an informal partnership of nations and other organisations striving to preserve the world's coral reefs and associated ecosystems. It's the only international partnership of its kind that's working solely on coral reefs. It was founded in 1994 by the governments of Australia, France, Japan, the Philippines, Sweden, United Kingdom, and the United States of America. And today there are about 90 members of the International Coral Reef Initiative, representing more than 70% of the world's coral reefs. But it's a fairly unique vehicle for coral reef nations to encourage the adoption of best practices in sustainable management of coral reefs, to build a capacity among other coral reef nations and managers, and also, importantly, for our discussion today, raise global awareness at all levels of the challenges faced by the world's coral reefs.
And I guess, Ben, arguably the Great Barrier Reef is the most famous coral reef ecosystem in the world, but there are hundreds of millions of people all around the world who depend on coral reefs on a day-to-day basis. Could you tell us a little bit about that and why coral reefs are so important to people in different parts of the world?
Yeah, so, David, as you mentioned, at the Marine Park Authority, we're not only trying to protect the Great Barrier Reef, but we're also leading this international initiative to protect coral reefs wherever they occur. And for Australia, the Great Barrier Reef, of course, is an icon that's intrinsically linked to our national identity. It's a very important tourism destination, but for other coral reef nations around the world, coral reefs mean many different things. They can be a primary source of food for some, and for many, like small island nations, they're a vital protection of people's homes from the impacts of storms. And again, for others like Australia, coral reefs are an important source of national income through tourism visitations they attract. So you mentioned that it's millions, hundreds of millions of people. It's estimated around about 500 million people in the world rely in some way on coral reefs for their livelihoods, and around 30 to 40 million of those rely on coral reefs directly for their livelihoods.
Right. So I think, it's such an important thing. I think people everywhere understand the beauty and diversity of coral reefs and appreciate them for that. But, just there's so many people around the world who are really dependent upon coral reefs for food and jobs and coastal protection. So I think the International Coral Reef Initiative is such a great forum for people all over the world to get together and collaborate to protect those precious ecosystems. So we might sort of shift away from that global perspective for a moment and get to a much more local perspective and talk to Sascha. Sascha Thyer works at our National Education Centre for the Great Barrier Reef, Reef HQ, here in Townsville. So Sascha, do you want to tell us a little bit about Reef HQ?
Well, Reef HQ, as you said, is the National Education Centre for the Great Barrier Reef. We're obviously very passionate about energy efficiency, and so we have the largest living coral reef aquarium, as I said before, and it houses 4 million litres of marine life, and it's a huge ecosystem that's been around for 34 years. So sometimes I like to think of it as being like a giant baby that we have to look after. It requires 24/7 uninterrupted power supply and temperature control. So energy efficiency is actually very important for this organism, and we need to make sure that we don't do anything to interrupt it. And recently we had to replace our main electrical infrastructure for the coral reef exhibit, which was a very tricky job because it meant that we had to do this without interrupting the power supply. So it's a little bit like replacing your heart and all your veins when you're still alive and walking around. So we had to do it very carefully. But
and Sascha, this is actually footage of the coral reef tank that we're seeing on the screen right now.
That's right. So you can see all the actual reef and all those rocks and the dark shapes you can see in there. That's actually alive. Even the rocks and the sand are all full of life and organisms. So when we replaced the electrical infrastructure, we had to make sure that we did it really carefully, and it was an opportunity for us to make our systems more energy efficient, which we're obviously really passionate about. So when we replaced the structures, we introduced better power management into the system. So in a little while, Katie's going to show us that main switchboard, and we can go into the room and have a look. So by replacing the main switchboard, we could make the system much more efficient and use smart energy management systems to most efficiently use our solar power, which we generate. And we're going to show you that in a little while as well. So we've done quite a range of other things as well to do with the energy efficiency. So when we replaced the main switchboard, we also introduced a new type of energy storage into our system that we previously didn't have. And it's a thermal storage system, which is most people wouldn't be familiar with that type of system. There's the main switchboard. So it looks a bit techy, but that whole system is designed to bring our grid power supply into the building, but it also manages our solar power that we generate, and it also manages our power supply if the mains power gets interrupted. So we also have diesel generators. So Katie's going to move now into the thermal storage room in a minute. Here she goes. There she goes. So she's just walking into the thermal storage room. It looks like a pretty complex system. It was actually co-funded by ARENA, who's the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, with a company called Glacium Technologies. And Glacium does thermal storage systems, and in this case, it's an ice storage system. So, you know that saying, make hay while the sun shines? Well, we make ice when the sun shines, and that allows us to most efficiently use our solar power system. So when the solar power is generating a lot of power and we have more than we need, and there's a bit of a surplus, we can make ice storage and then use that energy later. And the other fantastic... Yep.
Tell us a little about the coolant, because perhaps ironically, given concerns around climate change, you're actually using carbon dioxide in the system, right?
That's right. It sounds a bit counterintuitive to use carbon dioxide as a refrigerant, but we actually take the carbon dioxide and use it as a refrigerant. It's a natural refrigerant, and it's it has much less carbon emissions than the normal refrigerant, which has about 1,000 times more greenhouse gas emissions than the CO2 refrigerant. So that's an amazing technology that we've now incorporated into our system, which is more energy efficient and better for the environment. So I like to stick to an environmentally friendly term that I grew up with, which is reduce, reuse and recycle. So that's what we're really trying to do here. We're trying to reduce our power consumption as much as possible, reuse it where possible, and use it in the most efficient possible way. So now, Katie, if you can move back into the main switch room, and we'll have a look at the little micro hydro generators that we're also about to incorporate into our system. So we take energy recovery really seriously as well. It's quite a new technology to recover energy from your system. So this little device, it's a little bit like a wind generator, but it's a hydro generator. So we're going to incorporate it into one of our filtration systems, where we use energy for pumping around the filtration system. And then as the water returns back to the tank, the energy is kind of wasted as it goes back to the tank. So we're going to recover that energy through this little hydro generator on its way back to the tank, and we'll be able to recover about 10% of the energy that we use for that filtration system. So that's just another small measure that we can take to most efficiently use the energy that we're taking from the grid, but also most efficiently use the solar power system that we have at Reef HQ. So now, Katie, if you can walk down past our predator exhibit and to the solar power system, we might just have a look at that. So we've got quite a large solar power system on the roof of Reef HQ, It's a 260 kilowatt peak system, and we generate, sometimes of the day we generate as much power as we need. But obviously the sun's only shining for a certain portion of the day. So if we want to use that surplus solar power, we have to store it somehow. So that's what we've been working on with the thermal storage system. And we're also introducing a little bit of electrical storage into our system so that when we've got enough thermal storage and we don't need that either, we're not doing any cooling or heating, we can also use electrical storage. So there's part of the system there, taking up most of the roof. It's a very efficient system, and it generates about 25% of our total power needs. But I think with the new systems in place, we'll probably get to about 30% of our power needs. So there are other things that we're doing. We make energy efficiency and environmental sustainable practices part of our core business. So whenever we do any construction or any development, we make sure that we're incorporating the latest technologies to minimise our impact on the environment. So one of the things that we're doing in that regard is if we're doing construction of a new structure, like a concrete structure, we're using fly ash as much as possible in the concrete. And fly ash is a recycled product, I guess you could say. It comes from industry, and it has up to 80% less carbon emissions compared to Portland cement. So it's a good way of reducing the impact of building a concrete structure. So it doesn't sound very exciting, but it's a very important measure that we can take and we can demonstrate to others, because concrete represents about 8% of carbon emissions into the atmosphere. So it is a very important measure and something else that we can do to show others what the possibilities are to reduce your impacts.
And I think that's the thing. So, you know, we have always thought of Reef HQ as the education centre for the Great Barrier Reef, and that in the past has always meant teaching people about the fish and the corals and the other animals that are on the Great Barrier Reef. But of course now, trying to demonstrate to people what's possible in terms of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions is so important. And at Reef HQ, you know, we're not just talking the talk, we're also walking the walk. So energy efficiency, renewable energy production, novel construction techniques that reduce greenhouse gas emissions right across the board. I think it's just an amazing demonstration of what people can do and that it's possible to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and show a way for the future. So that's all fantastic work.
Thank you. And we feel it's important to sometimes be the first adopter and to you know, work really hard, work through some issues to make new innovations possible. And that's why we're really excited to be part of the ARENA project with Glacium, because it's a real innovation, also with the University of South Australia, looking at really amazing innovative technologies and working through those issues in a low risk way. And people probably think that, you know, we don't have to worry so much about the risk of introducing some of these technologies, but we do have this largest living coral reef aquarium that does require 24/7 uninterrupted power supply. So we do have to be really careful how we do these things as well. So we do understand for other businesses that it might be hard to take on some of these new innovations, and that's why we feel it's important for us to play a part in that, and then we can share lessons learned and talk about the successes as well.
You know, I think something that brings your work and Ben's really close together is the issue of partnership. You know, whether we're talking about local endeavors where you know, technology and engineering is partnering with biologists and funding sources to deliver great outcomes like what we have at Reef HQ, or whether we're talking about the global partnership of the International Coral Reef Initiative, it really is people working together that gives us hope for the future. Because, you know, at everything from a very specific local project to the biggest global issue, it's those partnerships between different sorts of people with different expertise and capabilities that actually give us the best chance for saving coral reefs. So that's really awesome. So I'm just wondering whether we're getting any questions coming in from the broader audience.
We do have one just wanting to know about what actions can they take at home.
So look, I think that's really great. Sascha, do you want to have a go at that one?
Yeah, I think the problem can seem very big for people, and sometimes, you know, people don't really know what to do. And I think really it's different for everyone, every individual, every household, every business. So I think the best thing that we can all do is start with the low hanging fruit and the things that are easiest for you to do that you're currently not doing. And I think, you know, there's a lot of information out there about what you can do, but, you know, don't try to take it all on at once. You can take on, you know, the small things that are easiest for you. So some, you know, one of my friends is a hairdresser, and we were talking about one time what can they do, and I was saying to them, well, do you know, put your towels in the tumble dryer, or what do you do? And we were talking about, you know, just different ways for that business that you could, you know, buy more towels maybe and hang them out, or just little things that they feel comfortable doing. And once you have the information about what's really going to make an impact, and people might not realise at home, you know, turning the lights off, or their hot water, whatever it is, you know, that they can do at home. I think they're the things that you really want to target and not take on too much. Because once you get into it, I've found that it's really, you know, it gives you that encouragement that you feel like you're doing something, and then you can take on the next thing that might be a little bit harder. And that's what we've done. We reduced our power consumption by 50% just by choosing the low hanging fruit, and by lifting our indoor temperature by 1 degree made a huge difference. It didn't cost us any money. Those things made a big difference. And then we picked some other low hanging fruit, obvious energy inefficiencies that we were doing. And now we're into the harder bit where, you know, it is harder, but it's also more exciting. And now we've got the experience where we can take on those bigger projects. So.
And I think that's just such great advice. You know, climate change can seem like an overwhelming problem, and if people just focus on what they can do and the contribution they can make, you know, I think that's awesome. And everybody doing their bit, you know, will get there. So that's really cool. I think we might have some more questions. Is that right?
Yes, we do have one just asking about, so what do we use our power for at the aquarium? Is it for oxygenating the water, or what else do we do?
That's a great question. So half of our power goes to the building for just general things that everyone uses. So we are an unusual building, but we also do the same things that everyone else does. So we have lighting, we have air conditioning, we have a cafe with kitchen equipment, and offices with computers, etc. But we also have mechanical equipment like pumps. So a lot of our energy goes to pumping, and that's a really good opportunity for us to make things more efficient. So you can, even just by integrating systems in a better way or changing the pipework, you can make things more efficient. And every time we change a pump, we make sure that the motor is the most efficient motor that it can be to do it most efficiently. But half of our energy actually goes to cooling, because we're in the tropics, pretty hot up here. We have to cool the building pretty much all year round. And then for a few weeks of the year, we need to actually heat the coral reef exhibit to keep it at the optimum temperature. So that's where a lot of energy does go, into cooling the coral reef exhibit and cooling the building as well. And there you can see a picture of it there. And it sounds weird, but we do use heating as well in those winter months. And we actually use the chilling system, strangely, to do the heating. So the byproduct of the chilling is used for heating in the times that we need that, which is only really a few weeks a year. So for us, that's where we need to really put our thoughts into how we can do that cooling most efficiently. And that really is completely related to what most individuals do, whether they're at home, in a cold country, in a hot country. wherever you are, most people have to think somewhat about temperature control. So another thing that we've done is we put in double glazing into our first floor part of the building, just to make sure that we weren't introducing too much thermal load, and that would reduce our cooling. And another thing that people might not realise is that your lighting, if you're air conditioning your house and you're using really energy inefficient lighting, that's actually contributing to the amount of air conditioning that you need, because the heat from those lights is not being used for the light, it's being distributed as heat into the space, and then you have to cool the space more. So using energy efficient lighting is actually better also for your cooling.
We have a general question as well about why do you love the reef? And I'm sure anyone could answer that one.
Well,
Sascha, why don't you have a go?
Sorry, what was that? Oh, so I just love I love being part of, one of the favourite parts of my job is being immersed in the coral reef exhibit and being part of the reef and being out on the reef. It's just a wonderful feeling to be part of that amazing, you know, in our case, it's a big organism. When you're in it, you feel like you're part of that community, and it's amazing. Every time I go in there, I see something new and amazing, and you just realise what a fantastic and wonderful work of nature that we have, and how important it is to protect it. So, and when we go out to the Great Barrier Reef, it's just so incredibly vast. It's taken so long to make that amazing structure, and it's so incredible and wonderful. And that's why I feel so passionate about it, and that we really need to do our best to protect it. What about you, Ben? What do you think?
I couldn't agree more, Sascha. You know, it's getting out to the Great Barrier Reef and actually visiting it is a really humbling experience for me. I think, you know, its vastness and its incredible diversity, and some of the most amazing and spectacular creatures that you can see. You know, it's literally awe-inspiring for me. I was lucky enough to be out for several days diving only a couple of weeks ago, in fact, and saw some absolutely amazing, healthy coral reefs offshore Sunday Islands, and it's just a really unique and exciting experience for me to the reef, and that's why I love doing what I do, and why I'm so passionate about the work that the authority does to help protect not only the Great Barrier Reef, but also to, you know, the work that we do trying to help all of the coral reef nations around the world and elevate that sort of importance of everybody caring for coral reefs.
Yeah, and look, I feel very much the same, in the sense of, you know, being personally inspired by the beauty of the reef and the fact that my daughter has now learned to dive. So I'm sort of rediscovering the Great Barrier Reef all over again by going diving with her. But I think the other part of what motivates us and keeps us inspired in what we do is how important the Great Barrier Reef is to so many people all over the place. So, you know, it's part of the Australian national identity. It's an international icon as a World Heritage Area. We have more than 2 million visitors per year come to the Great Barrier Reef and witness what an amazing place it is. It's an economic powerhouse. It generates billions of dollars in economy and tens of thousands of jobs. And of course, it's a critically important part of the spiritual identity of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, who are the traditional owners of the land and sea country on the Great Barrier Reef. And so for all three of us, I think, you know, there's an enormous responsibility to protect the Great Barrier Reef, not only for people today and how they use it and value it, but also for future generations. And I think that's, you know, just so critical, and why, you know, dealing with our local issues like water quality and fishing and so on, but also very much focusing on that broader global problem of climate change. So securing a better better outlook for the future. And I think, you know, my take home from this discussion is that both at local levels and global levels, if people work together in partnership, we can achieve some pretty amazing things. So look, Ben, Sascha, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to everybody who has listened to us in this webinar. If there are any questions that have come through that we haven't had time to answer, we will try and do that online in text. But of course, we are only still at the beginning of National Science Week here in Australia, and we have a series of further webinars coming up explaining how we at the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority use science in the protection of the Great Barrier Reef. Those webinars are going to be staged throughout the week. So please go and check on our website and see the details of those webinars. And so thank you very much for your time and for joining us for this great discussion, and we'll wrap it up there. Thank you.